Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our penultimate week here in Stir Crazy Month. This is the second to last week, and we're talking about regulations this week as part of this live panel. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching the recording, I hope you're sitting down and you have your pad and paper ready because we're going to be covering some really important topics during the next hour. We have a phenomenal panel with us today. We need to give a big thank you to our sponsor, Proper Insurance, who has sponsored the entirety of Stir Crazy Month. We have to give them a lot of thanks for their support to helping to get the message out about safety, sustainability, trust insurance, and regulations. For this particular live panel, we also have to thank Superhog, who are our sponsor for this panel. Superhog, they have created a great package of tools all around trust. And they provide like the best-in-class products for vacation rental industry through cutting-edge technology and data-driven solutions that effectively minimize risk-taking for the OTAs, property managers, hosts, and guests. So make sure you go visit Superhog and look at some of the products and services they offer to help you and your business to help bridge that gap with your guests. So as we move on today in this session, I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who is my business partner and my mum, and she is going to be hosting today's session and introducing all of our panelists. As we get started here, I'm just going to quickly throw out a poll for everybody who is attending live, and this just gives us a bit of an idea as to who's attending. Lets us know, about you and your business. So if you can just take a few seconds to fill that out, that'd be great. So Heather, it's over to you.
Thank you. This is I can't believe we are now in week 4 of Stir Crazy Month. It's been absolutely great, and to talk to so many people over the course of this month. For those of you who are newly coming to Stir Crazy Month, this was a crazy idea that I took on at the end of December. From a chance comment of Justin Ford's on a LinkedIn post saying that these topics, these really serious topics of safety, sustainability, trust, insurance, and regulations are just not given enough attention. So we wanted to do just that and give it this more attention. So throughout the month of February, where everybody's going stir crazy, we decided that we would talk about these issues. So we are, week 4, regulations. Thank you so much to Megan, to Jen, and to Alexa for joining us today. Can I ask you to just give a quick introduction, who you are, what your company is, and what your experience is with advocacy and regulations. Let's start with Alexa.
Thanks for having me, Heather. I'm Alexa Nada. I am the co-founder and COO of Rent Responsibly. We are a company that provides all sorts of services and resources under the umbrella of what it actually means to rent responsibly. So all the letters in Stir Crazy Month, we definitely cover. Most people know us for our work in advocacy. So if you've heard about Rent Responsibly, chances are it's through our work with alliances and individuals advocating for or against different policies or laws and things like that. I got here and the company exists because I used to be a property manager, then I covered regulations as a journalist. My co-founder, Dave, was also the co-founder of Noise Aware. So he dealt with all sorts of noise-related regulation. And we realized if there weren't groups on the ground organized and participating in these regulatory discussions, the industry was going to get steamrolled. So we had to figure out how to make advocacy and just having these long-standing community organizations be a thing that's easy to do everywhere. So that's why we exist.
That is great, and we're going to talk about all these things, and a lot of the programs that you have going on at the moment, and the help and advice you give people, you're going to be giving everybody that's looking at this panel today. Megan, welcome. Can you let us know where you're from and your experience with regulations and advocacy?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everybody. I am Megan Moylan. I'm the executive director of the Outpost Group here in very snowy Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And I've been in the industry now for almost 10 years. I started in the Florida Panhandle where regulation really like blew up about 5 to 6 years ago. And my experience then, I was a revenue manager and just a huge fan of the company that I worked for. So I would sit in city council meetings and learn as much as I possibly could. And when I moved up to Wyoming, in Jackson, regulation really hadn't been a big topic until the last like 18 months, conveniently right when I started. And so I helped found an alliance. I co-founded an alliance. Sorry, I'm recovering from some type of illness, which hence the tissue in my hand. Anyway, I co-founded an alliance with a couple of companies here in Jackson, and now we have been going on 2 years together. It's all the major vacation rental companies, and we've really started what I thought was the very beginnings of an alliance. Alexa has really helped tell me that we have made significant progress over the last 2 years, which has been great. But really, the initial goal was to just kind of share information and build relationships with each other outside of just the competitive nature that we have as competitors in the same area. And it's been a really exciting experience to get to know our local officials and build relationships with each other and just learn more about the regulatory issues that we're facing in Jackson and what we can do to be good neighbors here in a small town.
That's brilliant. I'm sorry about the snow, Megan.
I
Should be
know,
down here in
me too.
Alabama. The sun is shining, the water's
Right?
blue.
Seriously. My one vacation I've taken this winter was to Park City. I'm like, come on, leaving the snow to go to more snow.
Jen Boyles, welcome to the panel. You are in the place where regulations is a hugely hot topic right now. So give us a little background on yourself and what you do and what you're doing for British Columbia right now.
Hi, my name is Jen Boyles, and I am the CEO and founder of Direct Booking Success, and I help people with their marketing for direct bookings. So you're going to think, well, what the heck are you doing here on this panel? And trust me, I thank you, Heather, for inviting me, but I don't want to be here. I don't want to talk about regulations, but from what I find it, it's not a very sexy topic. But the problem is that it's happening everywhere. And I moved back to Canada last summer after being away in Europe and England for 21 years. And this is happening all over the world. I've come back to British Columbia and I've walked into a hornet's nest. And there is an out and out ban that the government is trying to propose for the whole province. And so I've been dragged kicking and screaming into this topic because it's so important. And I'm really glad that we're talking about it today, Heather.
Well, I'm so glad you're here to give us the British Columbia perspective because it is so front and center at the moment. But I want to kick off with, for those who are joining us who perhaps haven't been exposed to the whole issue of advocacy, and kudos to you for being here and for listening to this if you haven't. But I just talked to Rolf Blizzard from Atlantic Realty on the podcast today, and he said in that interview that you don't want to go into advocacy as if it's an emergency care measure. This should be primary care. I absolutely loved that analogy, but I think we should start off by just talking about some of the concepts and terms. We've already mentioned, regulations. We've mentioned advocacy. I could mention other things like lobbying and parity, and I think we just need to define some of these things. And I think, Alexa, you are the best person to give us those quick definitions on those terms that everybody should be familiar with and understand what they mean.
Yeah, I'll start with advocacy. You mentioned that one specifically. I do think some people, when they hear the word, might have some negative connotations around it. But really all it is going and voicing your support or your opposition to something. And it doesn't even have to be something major or inflammatory or something that even affects you. If you have an opinion and you share it, that's advocacy. You do not have to have any experience to start participating. All that matters is that you start. when we talk about terms, one of the things I think is the most important thing for somebody to do is to understand what terms your local government uses, because they are all a little bit different. They're all going to use somewhat different terminology. And so you've got to know exactly what they're talking about as they go through a regulatory process or are considering one. So that's my first suggestion for homework there, is to go look at your local government website and just get familiar with the words that they're using. There's no possible way I could predict them all. The one term I would love to call out that was not on your list is a tricky one, because it sounds so simple, but it trips up a lot of people, and that's the word vote. So throughout a regulatory process, there are a number of different steps along the way where some entity is voting on something. And if you're an advocate and you're not really paying attention and you're just skimming the headlines, you might see something like the Planning Commission voted to pass the STR ordinance. And you might think, oh, well, they passed it, lost cause, it's done. But what that really means is the Planning Commission voted to recommend that the council pass it when it gets to them. And so that goes back to knowing your government process and knowing the terms that they are using. If you are familiar with how regulations are made and you know what that vote actually means, then you can advocate really effectively at every step.
That is great. Megan, Jen, do you have any other terms, things that were being used in your areas that we might not have mentioned?
Just from, because I'm in Canada, the BC here, a lot of the, obviously the government works very differently. So there's lots of different terms, we're not in states, we're in provinces, things like that. But no, it's, I read a lot of it and I fall asleep. That's my problem, so it's really good to be here and hear Alexa actually telling us what some of these things actually mean. It's great.
Yeah, the only other one that I was going to say, my eyes are like watering from my coughing. I swear I'm not crying, although this topic is depressing to think about sometimes. Zoning laws. So this might be silly, but I just truly didn't really understand zoning laws before I moved to Jackson, really. And we have what is referred to here as an overlay, a housing overlay. And like zoning and overlays and where you can and can't rent, and just the way it's funny. And I know that our town is not different than other towns that are putting these rules in place, but they are designed to confuse you. So you trip up and you aren't adhering to them. And there are just more regulations that are inflicted upon your area. So zoning requirements essentially like where you can and can't rent. And I know that's super simple, but it was confusing to me at first. So that's really the only other one that I could think of.
This is one that came up over and over again in Ontario, because once we really got into this and we started looking at zoning, just about every single municipality had zoning regulations that did not permit rentals, and the places that I was renting were not zoned to be a commercial establishment, which is what they said that we were doing. But in just about every area, they were just, we'll not talk about it unless something comes up that that is going to nudge the council into having to do something. So we went ahead for maybe 16, 17 years, maybe 20 years after I bought my first property without even considering that we were not zoned to run a commercial establishment, until really Airbnb came on the scene and there were some bad apples. And that was the first thing that the local townships and municipalities unearthed, was the zoning laws that were buried deep in the bylaw, in the municipality bylaws. So
and then you find them and you're like, what does this say?
Yeah. I did. I spent a lot of boring time reading those things. I want to talk about staying ahead of regulatory changes and coming back to Rolf Blizzard and his primary care. Jen, how were the owners and managers in BC ahead of this, or were they really sideswiped?
Yes. And I personally, I was really sideswiped because I hadn't been keeping up with things. You know, I wasn't living here. And so to all of a sudden land here last summer and go, what is happening? The news came through in October. I can't remember the exact date, but all of a sudden it was just like this hornet's nest exploded, that the government was saying that they didn't want short-term rentals at all. And it's a blanket ban across the entire province for the larger areas where people, you know, that live, the larger cities. And it wasn't until I got a hold of, it was Dana, Alexa's cohort there, that I got in touch with her and said, what can I do? This is ridiculous. Like, you know, I'm looking around going, where is everybody and what's happening? And there's nothing that is really, the only association that I could find was the Northwest Vacation Rental Professionals, which is, you know, Alaska all the way down to wherever it ends, all along the Pacific Northwest here, but not something for BC specific. Thankfully, there's a great group of people that have come together to form the Property Rights BC Association. And it was launched very quickly in November. So of course there's growing pains. There's a steep learning curve because all of a sudden these are people who are running short-term rental businesses and they're property owners, and they're like, now we have to be an association and figure out what to do. But they've come together, and we've all come together as a province to get together, and we're raising money. And we are lobbying and using advocacy. And, you know, I'm new to this, you know, and I think most of us are. And I would just say that if you're in an area that this has not come up yet, band together. Because being on the back foot, I didn't understand this, but being on the back foot is not fun, and it's not easy because the government's already steamrolling ahead. That is, you know, the biggest thing. So yeah, you know, for me, it really came out of the blue, and for the association to quickly come together. But we're hitting our stride now, so it's good.
I've seen some great posts on LinkedIn from you to get people motivated to sign petitions and to get involved. So, you know, all power to you for that.
Well, it's hard though, because people think, oh, you run an Airbnb, you're loaded, you can afford to have these second, third properties. It's like, no, this is a business. And the businesses that the government wants to close are businesses that are legal. They've gone through the hoops. They've got their business licenses. You know, there's a whole group of these illegal people, you know, that don't have licenses, that are on Airbnb. And those are the people that we should be looking at. But this blanket ban is affecting people who have actual businesses and they've already got their licenses. And so something I like to think of is like, what if tomorrow they decide, okay, we're not going to have any bakeries. Let's close all the bakeries, but just have a few big ones around the city. But everybody else who has a bakery, it's going to be closed, and that's just the way it is. Like, I don't think the general public understand the power and how scary this is, that at one, you know, one industry can be targeted in this way.
I think
Alex,
sorry, can I jump in here a sec? So I think something I'm hearing a lot. I'm actually working very closely with Catherine Radcliffe and her event, the Can Stays Rental Alliance, which is bringing, and we'll talk about that more a little bit more in this session. And one of the things that she's realizing in talking to a lot of advocacy groups across Canada, and I think this is relevant to anywhere, not just in Canada, is if you don't become part of the conversation, the legislators and people who are looking at solutions to problems like rising house prices, lack of affordable housing, they're only going to listen to the people who are talking to them, the people who are talking the loudest. And in our industry, the only people who are talking is Airbnb. Now, Airbnb's business model is to have as many properties on their platform as possible, because that's their revenue model. That's how they get their revenues, have as many properties as possible. So they're speaking on behalf of professional property management companies, as well as all the other individuals who are marketing their property, but they're speaking on behalf really of themselves and their shareholders. You know, as a publicly traded company, they're in it for, you know, their profit margins, and they do an incredible amount of work for advocacy. I can't take that away from them. I mean, Airbnb do a phenomenal job, but at the end of the day, the conversation they're having with decision makers is to benefit Airbnb. And this is where professional short-term rental companies need to have a voice at the table. If you don't attend the meeting and get involved, something that Megan was saying, which I loved, was the fact, you know, you were a revenue manager, but yet you went to council meetings to listen to what was being talked about. And I think that's phenomenal that you had the foresight to do that and go and, you know, be a part of the conversation. I think that's a big part that we're all missing.
Yeah.
I just want to come back to Alexa on this about, you know, getting out there before it happens, because I think that that's always been that complacency, hasn't it? You know, well, it's not us yet, or it's not us at all. They're not going to touch us. And Rolf said in the podcast this morning, he said, even in the Outer Banks, which is a vacation rental destination, always has been, there's a certain part of the Outer Banks which is looking at banning short-term rentals. So you tell us about getting out there and getting organized and some strategies for staying ahead.
Yeah, I love that Rolf brought up the Outer Banks. That's actually where I started in property management. And I can very easily see how it would be easy to be complacent in a place like that, where you think you're never going to be touched by regulations because the entire economy is based on vacation rentals. And that's just not true anywhere anymore. If anybody is listening to this thinking you're never going to be affected by regulations, you are asking to be shut down. You are inviting that. So being involved, or at least being aware, is an essential part of operating a short-term rental from day one. Regardless of what's going on, it just has to be a part of doing business. So one of my biggest recommendations is to make as many relationships locally as you can. Whether or not you have an alliance or an association, you need to know your city manager. You need to know your planning department. You need to know these grass tops organizations, and you need to make friends with all of these people. You even need to be familiar with who the candidates are for future elections, because these elected official policymakers are constantly turning over. And so if you form great relationships with those kinds of people, they are going to be your canary in the coal mine when something's coming up. Or if they receive a complaint, they're going to call you first, but you have to build that relationship, and it's a two-way street. Yeah, that's the number one thing I think you can do to stay ahead of things. Obviously, you can set up all sorts of alerts and things, but by the time things are getting into the news or onto agendas, a lot of times it's too late.
So what's the best way of going about that? I mean, Rolf said, go and knock on their door. They knock on yours, go and knock on their doors.
Yeah.
And you know, turn up at their kids' baseball game. And I thought, you know, really?
I mean, if you don't have kids also playing in that baseball game, that might be a bit much. But I get what Rolf is saying, and I totally agree with it. Yes, just reach out, start with one person. If you're uncomfortable, that's okay. But remember that all of these people work for you. So want to hear from you. They want your vote. So go talk to them, go earn their vote. You can absolutely show up at their offices. Sure. You can give them a call. You can attend one of their public events where they're intentionally there to meet with the community. Whatever you can do to make that introduction, tell them who you are, show them that you care about what's going on in the community, that's your foot in the door. And then from there, try to meet with them occasionally in person or over the phone, just to chat. And in a lot of times, or in a lot of ways, make sure you're supporting their needs too. Like, you can't be there purely for selfish reasons. You have to support their initiatives or their campaigns, or volunteer for different things that they want to do in the community. Again, it has to become part of doing business. So you've got to work it into your regular business activities and your schedules and things like that.
Oh, that's great advice. Megan, I'll try and give you time to prepare with your voice. With what you're doing in Jackson Hole right now, how did you start? How did you start going out and getting together and networking with other companies? Because it's something we did in Ontario a couple of years ago, and the benefits were just enormous.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I agree so Jen and Alexa just said, like, if regulation hasn't hit you, it's coming. And it can seem doom and gloom, but it's just the reality, right? Like, owner relations are an everyday part of our job. Guest relations are an everyday part. Like, regulation needs to be brought into this like conversation where it's just a part of our job now. And it's unfortunate, but I think that was a realization that I had when I moved to Jackson, and I was in a unique position where I didn't know anybody in the community. And so I reached out to a couple of other CEOs and owners of businesses in our area. And it was interesting because there had never really been conversation. There was one alliance that attempted to form prior to COVID. And of course, we know how that story ended. Things just got crazy. And I mean, I think that's the other reason why vacation rental managers don't make this intense initiative to focus on regulation, especially if it's not impacting you at the moment. Like, we are busy people. We are doing the best we can already, and we already work 24/7 throughout the entire year. And so it can be a difficult realization to just figure out that you need to carve out even more time to do something, especially if it isn't impacting you yet. So we initially had these conversations, and we literally just met at a bar in town and met each other and talked about our businesses and what our goals were. And at this point in time, there was a new piece of legislation that had been brought to town about impacting, and it was going to impact all the homes that were outside of the short-term housing overlay. Anyway, long, very complicated, but it gave us this springboard similar to your story, Jen, where we had this opportunity to start a conversation. And during that conversation, we just said, like, number one, we want to build a relationship with each other. But number two, like, these regulations don't just impact me and they don't just impact you. It's a common interest that we all have. We want travelers to come in town. We want them to stay with our respective businesses, but that will not happen if we don't band together. And it really allowed us, like, and for me, because I didn't know anyone, circling back to that, and I was new in town, I did know the industry and I had a lot of knowledge about the industry that my colleagues in Jackson didn't have, especially operating in multiple markets, but they knew the town members that I didn't know, especially being such a small town that's really kind of like anti anybody that's not been here for years and years and years. And so having like different, I guess, in things that we were good at and a common interest allowed us to say, like, okay, I can bring in help from Verma and I can get in touch with Rent Responsibly and build these relationships. And I can let you know what we've done in these different areas while you can introduce us to all the city council members that we need to know. And we really just started attending the meetings. We had a Slack group for all of us and just created conversation. And one thing that I'm a really big proponent of, and Alexa knows this, is just like engaging with the community outside of council members. And I think our initiative as a whole has been to try to support our community, that in housing has been a really big thing here in Jackson. It is so difficult to find housing. So we all agreed to start donating money to our community housing trust. And it allowed us to just kind of take one step of like, if we can improve our reputation by actually contributing to our community, can this impact us for future regulatory conversations?
Yeah.
Sorry,
I want to double down on something Megan just said, and that is that you're the expert on the industry. And I think all of us in short-term rentals and vacation rentals have to know or recognize that we are the experts in our community in these regulatory discussions. If you're not in that room being helpful and educating decision makers about short-term rentals, that conversation is going to be left to people who don't know about them. Mike, to your point earlier, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. That saying, that's very true. So you've got to be at the table being that expert, not just with decision makers too, but with your broader community. Again, to Megan's point, if you recognize that you're the expert, you have a duty to share that information.
And can I say to vendors and suppliers too, because, I don't actually have a property in my local area. My property's in a different country, which now this week we've just heard that England is going to be putting regulations in too. Scotland's already gone through a whole thing. Like, it is spreading. But the thing is that this is my backyard. I would like to have a business here in the future. I would like to have some properties here. So I guess it is still, self-serving. But the idea is that it's the industry as a whole. And if you're a vendor or supplier and you're going, well, it doesn't affect me because my clients are worldwide. I've got businesses everywhere that I work with. It's your backyard. If you don't take care of your backyard, it's going to spread. And then next thing you know, your business is not going to have anywhere to go because it's spread across the world. And that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing. And so I'm always trying to call out people who are in the industry, but not necessarily a property manager, or own a property. Because if your clients are getting impacted, it's going to impact you as well.
Mike, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, add to what Megan was saying about, owner relations and customer relations. And you touched on it a little bit later on, Megan, about community relations too, is that quite often it could be your community that's actually working against you. It's your neighbors to your properties, especially if you had one or two incidences of noise complaints or guests who maybe have not been the friendliest to the neighbors of the properties that you're renting out. Incorporating those people. I mean, I had this short story. One of my properties, I moved in, and the relationship between the previous owners and the neighbors was not good, and that rolled over to my ownership of the property. And especially once I started renting it out, the neighbors treated our guests very poorly. And I got really frustrated. It's like, well, how dare you? This is my business. But I forget it's their home, it's their neighborhood. So I took it upon, we kind of brainstormed this, like, how can we fix the situation? So we ended up doing an annual barbecue. We did an annual barbecue to invite all the neighbors over to the property. I had 200 feet of beach that people would use knowing that they're not supposed to. And I just said, hey guys, use the beach whenever you want. Just please, no fires, no glass, the usual things, nothing too crazy. But then I'd also tell my guests, I changed the marketing. It wasn't a private beach anymore. I told them it's a public access beach. And yes, maybe that deterred some people, but I didn't see it in my marketing. But what I did is I ended up building the relationship with the community. And then I gave them my business card. I had a little magnet that they could put on their fridge. So if they had any issues, they knew exactly who to get in touch with. And we treated every single conversation like we were talking with friends. And I think that when you can involve your community, I'm gonna throw back to Jen in a minute, because you were mentioning about vendors and suppliers. Your community can be your supporters when it comes to these kind of things. So, yeah, Jen, did you want to cover that about vendors and suppliers?
Yeah, just what I was saying previously about getting them involved as well, because it's their backyard, and we just, we want to see, you've got clients everywhere, and it will spread. We're seeing it already. We really are. Yeah.
Just coming back to you, Jen, about on British Columbia, you said that, this is large towns and cities that are mostly impacted, but there's no discrimination here. It's everywhere. Like Kelowna, which I looked at the city of Kelowna description, and it describes it as a tourist mecca. Mm-hmm. It's a place where there's vineyards and there's loads of water activities, and this is where people come to vacation. But Kelowna has fallen into that number. It's just that's all it is, isn't it? It's how many people live there determines whether you can rent or not.
Exactly it. That's exactly it. It's almost like the government just threw a dart at the wall and said, okay, those cities will work for us. But it's not just Vancouver and Victoria. It's other ones, and it's neighboring ones. So there's a wonderful island off the coast of North Vancouver, West Vancouver, called Bowen Island. Mm-hmm. It's gorgeous. It's wonderful. You take a little 20-minute ferry, and you're in this completely different area. And again, it's a place where people come for holidays. They come for their vacations there. They can opt in to this new law. So now it's split apart this community of people who wanting to opt in when they don't even have to. So now the owners and the managers there are banding together. It's like there's bushfires all over the place. And we're trying to talk to local mayors and councils, but also we need the provincial government to hear this. It's a really weird thing. And I was in the hairdressers the other day, and this woman beside me was talking about she was moving to I think it might have been Powell River, but don't quote me. And she's like, but the house is too big, you know, we've got this extra actually floor that we don't need. She's talking to the hairdresser and she goes, so we're going to Airbnb it. And I was like, my ears perk up, right? And I'm like, oh, really? Are you? And my hairdresser's going, you don't want to talk about this now. You don't know who you're sitting beside. And so I just said, hey, you know, that sounds great, but have you thought about, you know, the legal implications? Oh, she says, we're fine because it's in our property. And I said, it's fine for right now, but what is the government going to do next? And she looked at me like, you know, I had horns out of my head or something. I did. I had dye on my hair and it was all sticking up. And she's like, you know, we're fine. And I'm like, yeah, you might be okay right now, but you don't know what's coming next. So before you jump in and think that, oh, you're just going to stick your property on Airbnb and have a great time, think about the wider implications and get involved with what is, educate yourself, you know, educate yourself on what is going on in the local area. And I think that's what, you know, a lot of people in the community aren't understanding, is that this is not just a problem for those sitting on Airbnb. This is a problem for everyone across the entire province. And if this actually does happen in BC, what's going to happen in Alberta tomorrow? What's going to happen in Manitoba? You know, what's going to happen in Washington State across the border here?
I wanted to bring up the topic that that we were impacted with in Ontario, because you mentioned bushfires, Jen. You know, it's like all these bushfires. Ontario does not have any provincial legislation. There doesn't appear to be any on the you know, in the offing, but I'm sure it's coming. But what has happened is that majority of the municipalities have now jumped up and decided to create their own regulations. There are 384 of these, 384 municipalities in Ontario. I don't know how many of them are partaking in getting legislation on their books and in their bylaws, but certainly in all the vacation areas, they are. And every single municipality is doing it in a slightly different way. So really, question for Alexa, you know, is how do all these little groups, how do you get them to come together? Because I see just dozens of Facebook groups from these tiny municipalities all getting together and networking, but they're not networking with each other.
Yeah, that I love this trend of more and more localities getting together. I'm finally, after years of this, starting to see the pace of that pick up, which is awesome. The challenge, though, is exactly what Jen was just saying, that Ontario is going to talk to Alberta and Alberta is going to talk to BC. And you better believe these cities and provincial governments and state governments are talking to each other and copying each other. So we have to do the same in our industry. You absolutely need a local presence. In some places in the US, you also need a county presence, and you also need a state presence. Same thing happens or needs to happen in Canada and every other country. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a full-on association from day one. That's great, but at a minimum, representatives from each of these markets and communities and these groups need to be networked together and meeting regularly to share information, share tactics, share things that they're hearing from their governments, share resources. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. Like, mechanically speaking, you can start from the local and form a state or a just broader regional informal coalition. You can start from the top down. This is what Arizona did. They had a preemption bill at the state level, which was constantly under attack. So they started with a state coalition made up of what they called community captains. And they had representatives from Scottsdale and Phoenix and all the major markets working together, both on the state stuff and on the local stuff. So that's the key, is just being together and sharing information. From there, you can go nuts with it. You can become associations at every level or an association with chapters and really blow it out of the water. But the key is just networking together.
Yeah, it was I guess the question really is, how do you start that networking together? Because, I found this when I was still very much involved in my company, that the Rental Managers Association didn't want to talk to the local independent owners association. And it is just, come on, people, you've got to get together because we're all in the same boat together.
Yeah. Well, I hope that that's not a hurdle everywhere, or that hurdle is starting to come down as more and more people are facing regulations and realize we've got to collaborate. We can't be enemies with each other here. In some instances, it's just going to take somebody continuing to knock on that door and form that relationship. And unfortunately, it's going to take time. But I think in most cases, if you have people who are willing to lead their local market, more often than not, they are looking for help, and they are going to be open to collaborating with other groups, at a minimum sharing information, if not doing more together. I see that far more commonly, and I hope that that trend is what overtakes this like lingering resistance to work together.
Mike, you got a hand up. I wasn't sure if that was an old hand or a new hand.
No, it's a new hand. So really, it's just a follow up from. It's a good segue now into. I do want to touch on CanSTAI's Rental Alliance conference that's happening in Banff in Alberta towards the end of April. I'm going to throw some details in the chat shortly, but this is an event that's being put on to bring together, and it's. I've never heard of this on a national level before, even in the States. I haven't heard of a national level conference where you're bringing together high level politicians from both provincial, and for us, provincial and federal, which in the States would be from the state legislature as well as from the federal government as well, to have the conversation. And what I'm finding really alarming is to hear from Kath Radcliffe, who's the organizer, is how much she's struggling to get property management companies to attend. And it really falls out of this conversation we were just having about, local or provincial level organizations who think that, well, I don't need to go and to this federal conference because, I'm only worried about Ontario, or I'm only worried about my municipality. And I think that the biggest concern I have with that kind of mentality is if all of the politicians and the legislators are going to this one event, they're expecting to see us there. They're expecting to have that conversation with people from across the country. They know this is a hot topic in our industry. They know that they're looking to make changes. And again, they're attending the meeting. They're showing up to the meeting. They're going to be there. They want to listen to what we have to say. And if the only person who's in the room is Airbnb, that's the only voice they're going to hear. So, we're going to be doing a lot more promoting of the CanSTAI's event through March. But really, I can't. Not to be overly dramatic, but it almost brings me to tears to think of all the people that I've spoken to, all the companies, all the short-term rental SaaS products, and all these people who go out and do their sponsorship, who are not getting involved in this event because it doesn't fit their budget. And it's like, I don't think you seem to understand is you won't have customers in Canada unless you help support this and keep the industry running. If we could, again, it seems very dramatic, but it is a real possibility for us in Canada that we could lose our industry. And if we don't show up, then it'll just get taken away from us. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm sure, Jen, you probably have something to add on to the end of that.
Well, no, I was, you've given me goosebumps because what you're saying is totally true. We won't have an industry here in Canada if this continues the way it is. And this event is going to be groundbreaking. It really is. And I'm going to be there. And I know you're going to be there. Heather's going to be there. We're going to be there. And really, the politicians don't want to just talk to us. They want to talk to other people too. And we need everyone to come together. And I'm getting the same thing. I was talking to someone yesterday who's in Ontario, and her face was completely blank when I'm talking to her about this. And she goes, "Oh, I'm going to another event." And I said, "Does that event going to affect your livelihood as much as this event will?" And she's just like, "I guess not." And I'm like, "Yeah, we need to make some choices here about where we're going to go. But this is a groundbreaking event. It's never happened before in Canada. I hope it happens again." But she's bringing in politicians. This is unheard of.
I know, and the other thing that I got thinking about too is how municipalities and states and federal, they're looking at what's happening around the world. They're looking at other countries, other municipalities, other states, other provinces to see how they're dealing with a problem. And if this is allowed to happen in Canada, it's going to have a significant impact in the States. It's going to have a significant impact. It seems crazy for we live in or we work in our own little bubble, thinking that we have our little business, but this has global implications to our ability to run short-term rental businesses, because we're at that tipping point. We're at that tipping point where the industry is it's the same with Uber, it's the same with Lyft. Like, you're seeing these same this sharing economy is coming into its own, and governments are struggling to figure out how to work in this new economy. But again, it all comes down to, if you're not part of the conversation, you don't have a say, and basically it could get taken away if that's what they choose to do.
Yeah,
Like,
and regulations are not bad. Like, I think we need to make that a point. Not all regulations, they're not bad. But an out and out ban and not talking to anybody in the industry and not working together for the right solution that helps everyone is the problem. And this is what we're facing.
Alexa, what resources are out there for for people who are listening to this and thinking, yes, well, perhaps I can do something. Where do they go to find those resources and tools and perhaps more information?
Oh, that is a great question. And I'm not going to do it justice because there are so many resources out there. I'm going to forget some. Of course, Rent Responsibly has a huge library of guides and tools and templates for individual advocates, as well as people interested in starting an association or growing one and making it really powerful. And if you fall into that latter camp, we also have a private group just for alliance leaders who can or that has a bunch of additional resources in there, as well as a network of people who have gone through exactly what you're going through, who can share lessons and ask questions and all sorts of great things. So I recommend those two things. I recommend signing up really for every alert you possibly can from your local government, from Airbnb and Vrbo. Go check your settings right now and make sure you're subscribed to policy updates, set up Google News alerts, do all the things, make sure you have all the information coming at you that you can. If you need data, there's a number of different places to get that. You can submit FOIA requests. That's what they're called here in the US. I don't know the equivalent in Canada. But you can submit requests to your local government to get things like complaint data and 311 calls and things like that. And of course, with economic impact data, you don't have to have a whole bunch of money to go hire somebody to build an economic impact report. You can piecemeal one with resources like Key Data and AirDNA. If you're a member of the VRMA, use their advocacy toolkit and the reports they have in there. Get reports from your DMO or your local realtors association. The data is out there and there are resources out there. I can send you a whole bunch of links for after this, but just do some Googling and get everything for free that you can.
Fantastic. Megan?
I was going to say three things. So the first thing, where do you start? You asked this question a little bit ago. I think it can just start with two people. Like, it doesn't have to be this really overwhelming thing. Like, reach out to the largest company in your area or the smallest company in your area. Like, reach out to somebody, ask them to meet you for lunch, and just say like, hey, I know this hasn't impacted us yet, but I do pay attention to the industry and I feel like it's coming. Like, I would love to form a relationship with you where we kind of talk about what we could do proactively to prevent this. So like, that's step one, start with one person so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. What Jen said earlier resonated with me a lot, right? Regulation isn't bad. And I think that's really important. Like, one thing that we approached our town with was, hey, we know that you have made up your decision around these rules that you are putting in place that are going to impact us. We just want a seat at the table and to be able to tell you how it will impact us and our daily operations. And is there a way that the way that you implement them in our area could be easy for both of us to adhere to, right? Like it was going to require logging into this specific platform and getting all these different permits and things that were just going to overcomplicate our operations so much. And honestly, was going to be so much for the town to keep up with in the first place that I think they were feeling overwhelmed. And so I think us approaching it from this, like, we're not going to fight you on it anymore. We really just want to say, like, hey, we want to make this work. Is there a way that you could allow us to have this seat at the table? And then the third thing that I was going to say, and Alexa and Dave have been great about this from our perspective and our association, find somebody that's doing it better than you are and doing it for longer in a different area and email them or message them on LinkedIn. I think people, the incredible thing about our industry, which I haven't been a part of any other industry, so I don't really know if it's like this everywhere else, but I like to tell myself that it only exists in our industry. We have the most willing group of people to share information that, like, it truly blows me away how easy it is to make friends and get on a call with someone. I know that we're busy every single day, but it's almost like this lifeline having each other where it gets us out of our day to day and allows us to build relationships. And I think that's something that no matter what, we should all be taking advantage of, whether it's regulation or any other important topic that impacts us. So reach out to Alexa and say, hey, who's someone that has formed an alliance or has started this conversation and has done it really, really well. Would you mind connecting me with them? Sorry, Alexa, I just signed you up to do that.
Ah,
but
please do. I love it. I love it.
but I think that's a great place to start.
When we started the Ontario Cottage Rental Managers Association about 6 years ago, it took a couple of years to really get going. But I remember that first meeting when I think there were 5 of us. We got together in one room and we organized this little room for an entire day, and we had lunch brought in, and it was just my business partner and I that set this up, and we had no idea what it would be like. We had all these air quotes competitors, but we'd never really got into a room together with them. And we had the most wonderful day. It was the best when we sat there and suddenly realized that we weren't alone. Everybody had exactly the same issues. There were no secrets. We were all doing the same thing. We were all trying to achieve our standards and meet our standards, and the conversation never stopped. That first meeting, we never touched on advocacy because that's not what we'd started it for, because it wasn't really something that we were worried about at that time. Now that little group of 5, I think last time I looked, there were probably about 25, 30 members, and they are strongly supporting lobbying, different lobbying campaigns that are going on. They are getting in touch with the provincial legislators. They're certainly getting in touch with their local legislators because they are appearing at all the meetings. Somebody's always at one of the meetings. And if it's not in their area, that they might travel to it, or somebody else will come to it if they can't make it. And it is truly a collaborative network now. And it was great that that just kicked off as let's get together and have some sandwiches and soup and have a chat. And now it is a full-blown organization. And we went to Rent Responsibly, to the website, to find out what others were doing. And we went, and there's a whole list of all these different organizations in different places. And we were able to go to their websites and see what they were doing on their websites. And we learned a lot from that, cloned a lot. And then they began to do their own thing. But Rent Responsibly has such value in all of the material it has. I really encourage anybody listening to go there immediately after watching this and see what's available.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're coming up to the last 5 minutes here. And what I wanted to do is just kind of take a look at some of the questions that came in as part of the poll. If I could remember how to do that and how to find them. But again, I just wanted to give another promotion for the, sorry, I'm going to have to close this poll first. So I'm going to have to close that one and go back to the last one so I can get the results. My apologies, everybody. So if I get these.
We'll just
At
hum
least you
along.
weren't blowing your nose in front of a bunch of people.
Okay, so some of the
Could be
questions we
worse.
had was, what can I do as a single property owner manager to get involved in my area? And I kind of think we've covered that. But Alexa, if you just want to kind of, one, two, three things that a single property owner could do.
Well, there are two different avenues for that. If you are local, go do all the things that we just talked about. Get in front of your decision makers, make relationships locally, meet your neighbors, do nice things like Mike, what you were talking about for your neighborhood. If you're not in the area, there is a number of things that you can still do, even if you're not a voter or you're hours away from the destination. You can still join your local alliance. You can still contribute time, talent, money to important advocacy causes. You can still call, email, write to the powers that be and advocate for yourself and for short-term rentals. There's very little you can't do if you're not in the area. And I'll plug our library. We actually did a whole event about all the different ways that you can advocate from afar. So like Google that exact phrase, advocating from afar, and you'll find a huge list of things that you can do.
That's great. And actually, the other questions were very much focused on just, I'm here to learn. And the other one was somebody who's arranging advocacy in Oregon, who's just here to kind of hear about what's going on elsewhere. I think it's always, if you're already part of a group and you're looking to learn from other groups, obviously Rent Responsibly and your network is the place to go.
Okay, let's go round the table here for a last word. For those of you who are listening, what's the one big takeaway from this? Jen.
Well, for me, I think what I want people to take away from this is that it's coming. It's here. If you haven't heard about regulations and restrictions in your area, start looking for it because it's happening, and get together with others. I think that's some great points that have come up about getting together with others and start talking about it before the policymakers have made up their mind.
That's great. Megan?
My one piece of advice would be, I know that we're really busy, and this is one of the most overwhelming jobs that we could have picked to do, especially if you own or run a vacation rental company, whether you have 1 unit or 500. But look at the pie chart of where you spend your time and make sure you are cutting a slice of pie for community engagement and being in tune and in touch with regulatory impacts that could have on your business now or in the future.
That's great. And over to you, Alexa, for the final word.
My biggest takeaway, and the thing I want everybody to know, is that you can do this. You do not have to remember anything from high school civics classes. You do not have to have any experience in advocacy. None of us around this room or anywhere else in the industry have degrees in this. All that matters is you take a first step. So after this, go find a local alliance, go call one of your city council members, just take an action, and you'll see very quickly that you are fully capable of participating and you might actually really enjoy it.
And I'll just add my final one. Thanks once again to Rolf Blizzard that it's all about making a primary care plan so that you don't have to be attending the emergency room.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, panelists, thank you so much for giving up an hour to be with us today. This is obviously a very important ongoing conversation that we'll continue to have here at the Vacation Rental Former Business School. We'll continue to share, repost, and get out as much information as we can about regulations and legislation happening across North America and Europe. Something that I just want to bring your attention to again is the CanStays Rental Alliance Conference that is happening in Banff, the April 20th to the 22nd. I highly recommend, even if you are not Canadian based, that you attend. This is an opportunity to connect with other short-term rental business owners, find out how people are working on their advocacy. And there's going to be lots of sessions there on general education for short-term rental business owners. So you're not missing out there. This isn't just going to be an opportunity just to meet Canadian politicians and Canadian regulators, but there's going to be a ton of education there as well. And we'll be promoting that all the way through March. So if you can spare the time, and it's not if you can spare the time, you have to make the time to attend. As I said, all of our businesses that we work with here in the States as well as in Canada, if you can make it, please attend. Just as I wrap up, just a big thank you again to Superhog, our sponsor for this live panel, and also to Proper Insurance, who have sponsored the entirety of Stir Crazy Month, where we've been covering safety, sustainability, trust, regulations, and insurance. That's not right. That's not spelled right, but you know what I mean.
I had to spin it round Stir.
Yes. So next week is Sustainability Week. So we will be back here. I believe it's on. Actually, I can't tell you when it's going to be next week off the top of my head, but I will be promoting heavily. And if you're registered for this session, then you'll be getting notifications. And if you're watching the replays, then please make sure to register, and we'll update you with all of the content we've shared through Stir Crazy Month. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you will take one thing away, is to get involved. Exactly as Megan said, take a little slice of your time to get involved and be part of the solution and not just complain about the problem. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.